There are wounds we remember, there are wounds we don't. And then there are wounds that have become so deeply woven within us that sometimes we mistake them for personality. We call them cynicism, we call them wisdom, we call them independence, we call them strength. Sometimes we even call them love. But beneath all those names, there may simply be an old wound that's waiting to be restored. Tonight we're stepping into the light of Aladiah. Join me now in and through the static seance. Aladiah is the 10th name of the Shem HaMephorash, a name traditionally associated with restoration, mercy, healing, reconciliation, and the return of something that has been damaged to a state of greater balance. And tonight's question is not, what happened to me? It's, what wound in you begs for restoration? Before I turn this into a personal meditation, I want to do something that I think is important whenever we explore occult traditions. We need to distinguish history from interpretation. Because the occult world is full of beautiful ideas, and sometimes those ideas acquire a history that they never actually had. The Shem HaMephorash is a perfect example of this. The phrase Shem HaMephorash is Hebrew, and is often translated as something like the explicit name, or the distinctly expressed name. But historically, the term is used well before the familiar system of the 72 angels. Early Jewish sources used Shem HaMephorash in connection with the divine name, particularly with Tetragrammaton. Later traditions developed other interpretations of the phrase, including 42 letter and eventually 72 fold formulations. The familiar 72 fold system is connected to three verses in Exodus, and that's chapter 14, verses 19 through 21. Through a method of writing the letters in alternating directions and combining corresponding letters, the tradition produces 72 three-letter combinations. Later, divine suffixes like El and Yah were added to these combinations, producing the angelic names known in Western occultism. And this is where the story begins moving through the Jewish mystical tradition into Kabbalah, and then eventually into the ceremonial magic traditions that we see most commonly today. In the 16th century, Johann Reuchlin, apologies for the pronunciation, discussed the 72 names in De Arte Kabbalistica. He and other Kabbalists helped establish the idea of these combinations as individual angelic entities. Agrippa later incorporated related material into 3 books of occult philosophy. And centuries afterwards, occultists associated with organizations like the Golden Dawn would continue rearranging, refining, and expanding these correspondences. So when we speak of Aladiah tonight, we're not talking about an angel whose biography begins within the Genesis. We're talking about a figure who emerged from a long and complicated history of mystical traditions. And I think that actually makes the symbolism more interesting, because Aladiah is not simply an angel that heals you. Aladiah represents an idea of restoration, a current of thought, a spiritual image, a way of asking what it means to become whole again after something has broken you. Restoration requires something different than from simple destruction. Destruction says, get rid of it. Restoration asks, what can be recovered? Destruction says, forget, and restoration says, remember, but differently. So in the past, what wound from your past has shaped you the most? Not what was the worst thing that ever happened to me, not what person hurt me the most, but what wound shaped me? Because those aren't necessarily the same thing. Sometimes the most influential wound isn't the most dramatic one. Sometimes it's the one that just quietly makes you see people differently. Maybe it changes the way you trust, the way you love, the way you defend yourself, the way you feel affection, the way you react to criticism, or interpret silence, or understand yourself. A wound can become an architect. And if we're not careful, we can end up living inside the building it designed for the rest of our lives. There was a person in my past that abused me, and that person also taught me a great many things. That contradiction is difficult to explain, because when we talk about abuse, we often want the story to be clean. Victim, villain, end of story. And sometimes that simplicity is necessary, because abuse should never be romanticized. Harm should never be excused because someone taught us something. And the fact that someone inspired us doesn't erase the harm they caused. But human beings are not always clean stories. Sometimes the person who wounds you is also the person who introduces you to something extraordinary. A way of thinking, a discipline, form of art, philosophy, or mystery, or even just a possibility that you didn't think existed. And that creates a kind of strange grief, because you don't simply mourn the person. You mourn the relationship, you mourn what could have been, you mourn what it was. You mourn the things that were beautiful, and you also mourn the things that were terrible. And all of this happens all at once. For me, that person inspired me, that person hurt me. Both statements are true. And for a long time, I tried to make one cancel out the other, as if I had to decide. Did I love this person or did I hate them? Were they important to me or were they destructive? Did they give me something or did they take something from me? But that's the wrong question. Restoration begins when we stop demanding that contradictory truths destroy each other. Think about the symbol of yin and yang. Two forces, black and white, light and dark, each containing a small piece of the other. But what's fascinating about the symbol is that it isn't static. It isn't two halves sitting peacefully beside each other. It's movement. The two forces curve around one another. They spiral, they flow. They create a circle and rotate. And that's what makes the whole. And that's something that I've struggled with personally. The duality of love and hate. The fact that I can feel love for someone that hurt me. The fact that I can feel hatred for someone who once inspired me. The fact that gratitude can coexist with grief. And admiration with anger. And forgiveness with resentment. I used to think those emotions had to fight each other until there was a winner. But they aren't opposing forces. They're simply information. Love tells me something mattered here. Hate tells me something mattered here, too. Grief says something was lost. Anger says something was violated. Gratitude says something was received. Forgiveness says, I refuse to remain permanently imprisoned by what happened. None of those emotions need to erase the other. They need to be understood, integrated, given their proper place. That, to me, is the beginning of restoration. And this is where Aladiah becomes especially interesting, because restoration doesn't mean returning to exactly who you were. If a vase breaks and you glue it back together, it isn't the same vase. The cracks remain. Now the cracks are a part of history. The goal is not to pretend like nothing happened. The goal is to stop brokenness from being the only thing that the object can express. And maybe that's what healing is. Not erasing the scar, reclaiming the body around it. Reclaiming the mind around it, reclaiming the life around it. One of the ways I understand Adalia's symbolism is through reclaiming vitality. Wounds consume energy. Sometimes we don't realize how much. Seriously, how much energy goes into remembering, defending, explaining, replaying conversations, imagining alternative endings, wondering what we could have said, what we should have done, wondering whether the person even understood what they did, whether they regret it, whether they remember us. And eventually you realize that you're just giving energy to a person that's not even in the same room, or on the same planet, in my case. That's the cruelest part. The wound doesn't need the other person to remain present. The wound can keep them present all by itself. Restoration means reclaiming that energy, not pretending it never existed, but taking it back. The second movement of Aladiah is breaking cycles, because unhealed wounds repeat themselves, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes we become the person who expects abandonment, so we leave first. Sometimes we become the person who expects betrayal, so we never trust. Sometimes we expect manipulation, so we become hypervigilant. Sometimes we expect love to hurt, and when it doesn't hurt, we don't recognize it. It's the terrifying thing about trauma. Sometimes the familiar feels safer than the healthy, because familiarity gives us instructions. We know how to survive it, and we don't necessarily know how to live without it. So breaking a cycle can feel really uncomfortable. You aren't just giving up pain, you're giving up a pattern you understand, and you're stepping into a life that you don't. That's why restoration requires courage. Then comes another part of Aladiah, becoming receptive to grace. Grace is a difficult word, especially when you've been hurt, because grace can sound like, just forgive, let it go, everything happens for a reason, be the bigger person. And I don't think that's what grace has to mean. Grace doesn't require you to deny what happened. Grace doesn't require access, or reconciliation, or forgetting. And forgiveness doesn't mean that somebody gets to hurt you again. Sometimes forgiveness means you don't get to dictate the shape of my future anymore. That sounds a lot different, doesn't it? Forgiveness can have boundaries. Forgiveness can have distance. And it can coexist with accountability. Sometimes forgiveness isn't primarily what we give to somebody else. Sometimes it's something we finally give ourselves. So in the present, what part of you is calling for healing now? For me, that's the part of me that's still carrying resentment and the grief. I've forgiven this person to an extent, but I still have resentment. I still have grief. And I don't think admitting that means forgiveness failed. I think it means I'm still human. There are wounds that can be understood intellectually far before they're understood emotionally. You can say, I forgive you, and then 6 months later still just hear this voice in your head screaming, but why? And maybe that's okay. Maybe forgiveness isn't a door that you walk through just once. Maybe it's a landscape, and you keep walking through it. Some days the road is easy. Some days you find yourself standing in the same old field, looking at the same old house, remembering. This is where my struggle with love and hate comes back. I have to learn to let those emotions move, like yin and yang, not frozen, not separated, spinning, transforming. Because if I freeze the hatred, then it becomes an identity. And if I freeze the love, then it becomes nostalgia. Both can trap me. But if I allow them to move, then they can teach me. Love can teach me what mattered. Hate can teach me what violated my boundaries. Grief can teach me what I valued. Anger reveals what I'll never tolerate again. And gratitude teaches me what I can carry forward. This is what I mean when I talk about these feelings and emotions not being opposing forces. This requires me to understand them. And that brings us to another aspect of restoration, wholeness of self. There's a tremendous temptation after being wounded to define yourself through the wound. I am what happened to me. But that's incomplete. You are what happened to you and what you chose afterward. You are what someone gave you and what you refused to become. You are what someone took and what you reclaimed. You are your grief, but you are also your laughter. You are your anger, but you're also your compassion. You are your scars, but you're also the flesh surrounding them. The wound is just a part of the story, not the whole story. There's another beautiful correspondence related to Aladiah in Western occult tradition. The Six of Pentacles, a card traditionally concerned with giving and receiving, resources, charity, balance, exchange. And that makes for an interesting metaphor in healing, because wounds distort our relationship with giving and receiving. Sometimes we give too much. Sometimes we refuse to give anything. Sometimes we believe that we have to earn love, or we give people access to us because we're afraid that withholding that might be construed as cruel. And sometimes we associate forgiveness with continued access. Restoration asks us to reconsider exchange. What do I give? What do I receive? Who has earned access to me? Where am I overgiving? Where am I starving myself? Where am I allowing another person's needs to become more important than my own? The Six of Pentacles reminds us that healthy exchange requires proportion. And that could be another definition of restoration. Proportion. Putting things back into their proper relationship. So in the future, how will restoration guide me forward? For me, I need to break free of these cycles. It's paramount for me to achieve peace. Not forgetting or pretending or rewriting the past, just breaking the cycle. It's totally different. I don't want the person that hurt me to become the invisible author behind all of my relationships moving forward. I don't want their voice living in my head. I don't want their actions determining what I believe what love is. I don't want their memory deciding what I'm allowed to become. And I don't want my future to be a courtroom where I'm constantly prosecuting the past. At some point, I have to leave the courtroom. There's an image that has helped me. I imagine my healed self being someone just over another hill. I can't see them yet, but they're there. Somewhere. And I don't mean healed in the sense that they've forgotten. I mean healed in a way that the wound no longer controls their movement. They're walking, they're breathing, they're living, they're creating, they're loving. And maybe they occasionally still feel the ache, but the ache isn't the center of the universe anymore. It's simply one star in the sky. And somehow just believing that that version of myself is out there over that next hill is relieving in itself. It relieves the ache. It gives me hope. Because I don't have to become that person tonight. I don't have to solve everything right now. I just have to walk toward them. One step, then another. So tonight I want to ask the question again. What wound in you begs for restoration? Not destruction, restoration. What part of you needs its energy restored? What cycle needs to end? What emotion have you been trying to destroy instead of understand? What part of yourself have you abandoned because of what someone else did? What would it mean to forgive without forgetting? What would it mean to establish boundaries without hatred? What would it mean to remember without returning? And who are you becoming after what happened to you? So think about the wound. Acknowledge that it exists. Now imagine the wound as a place, a room, a field, a house, a forest, whatever appears. Don't judge it, just observe it. Now imagine that beyond this place is another hill. And imagine beyond that hill is a version of you that no longer needs to carry this wound. Don't ask how you got there. Don't ask how long it took. Just see them. They're waiting, not demanding, not judging. Waiting.
Hold me under until I breathe, and slow my sink till I creep beneath. Where is now my soul to keep? In the sweet deep freeze of a cryosleep. She took the plastic out the door. She put her smile in a needle, corrupt the writing on the wall.